For 57 years, the sister of Beverly Jarosz has been looking for her killer. Was it a stranger or somebody much closer? There's some really interesting suspects in this cold case, and police haven't stopped investigating. Join me with Vinnie Politan on Court TV for this perplexing whodunit. Nearly 57 years ago, just days after Christmas, 16-year-old Beverly Jarosz was strangled and stabbed to death in her bedroom. Beverly was a gifted and well-liked student at her Marymount High School. Her autopsy would later reveal that Beverly died from asphyxiation, strangulation, and 42 stab wounds in her neck and chest. Let's watch this segment on Court TV with Vinnie Politan.
It is time to open up tonight's unsolved case file. We go back to 1964, a horrific murder of a 16-year-old girl in Cleveland, Ohio. Homa Bash from WEWS has the story.
A small bungalow on Thornton Avenue in Garfield Heights was where Beverly Jarosz was killed, brutally stabbed to death. Jarosz, 16 years old, a student at Marymount High School, was to go shopping with friends. A Christmas break shopping trip she never made.
Somebody got a hold of Dad at work, and Dad came home and discovered the pretty bad crime scene.
There were no signs of forced entry. In this film from 1964, investigators invite our news cameras into the scene. Her upstairs bedroom, where Beverly was murdered, stabbed repeatedly. No weapon found, but on the scene a rope used to tie her up. County Coroner Sam Gerber made a rare public call for help.
And the clouds of fear and anxiety hovering over this community bring me to you.
Probably literally thousands of tips came in.
Among the tips, people, for whatever reason, falsely confessing to the crime. Investigated and dismissed. The trail grew cold.
Through the 70s, 80s, and 90s, they essentially fouled up on what they could, and unfortunately didn't come up with the right answer.
Chief Sackett grew up in this town, joined its police force in 1983. In the early 2000s, as a detective, he and a colleague used DNA testing to try to find Beverly's killer.
The coroner's office still had all the evidence. So there was some preliminary DNA testing done, and that didn't help us out.
The lead investigator, long since retired, met with Sackett and his partner.
He had his opinion of who he thought the suspect was, and through the years just didn't have the evidence to prove or disprove it.
Suspects, some of whom are still alive today. Garfield Heights residents, they have their theories of what happened in this house. Beverly's father lived in this house until his death in 2012. Her sister and mother moved away long ago. Still in Ohio, waiting for that call from Chief Sackett.
Mom and the sister deserve an answer. That kind of keeps us going.
50 years later, a young girl, her life unlived. The question today, as it was in 1964, who killed Beverly Jarosz?
We don't have an answer yet, and we're not giving up.
Not giving up. Maybe someone said something. Maybe you heard something. Here's the phone number, 216-475-5686. That is the Garfield Heights Police Detective Bureau, 216-475-5686. Incredibly tragic for that dad. I mean, he stayed in that house for all those years, never got the answer. Still with me, retired police commander and host of the Profiling Evil podcast, Mike King, and retired FBI Special Agent Bobby Chacon. And joining us now are two special guests in Cleveland, Ohio. Author who is currently working on a book about the Beverly Jarosz case, Dr. James B.O.L.O. And in Cape Coral, Florida, crime scene investigator for the Cape Coral Police Department and author of Evidence of Murder, Lisa Black, who also spent some time working in Cleveland, of course. Great to have everyone with us. James, let me begin with you. Are there clues, are there leads in this case? James, do you hear me?
Apparently not.
James is not hearing me, but Lisa Black is. Lisa, what can you tell us about this case? What do we know about leads or any potential people who were looked at here? Neighbors, friends, boyfriends?
Well, there were thousands of tips, and apparently the case was exhaustively investigated. They had many suspects, you know, vague suspects, checked them all out, went the extra mile, and did everything they could. But apparently there was never enough evidence against any one person that they could get a conviction or even an arrest.
I'm going to try one more time. Dr. James B.O.L.O, can you hear us? No, definitely can't hear. I thought I heard him in the background there. Bobby Chacon, let me ask you, 1964, this case is old. It's older than I am. Is this one that can still be solved?
I think so, and I think because of what was just said, I think that there was good crime scene work done for the time. There was good exhaustive investigative work done. You heard in the piece that the lead investigator has an idea of who he thinks did it. So there are clues, there are hints, there is some at least evidence that points to certain people. Now, it's obviously hasn't reached the threshold needed to get an arrest warrant, and the prosecutor to take the case to trial. But there is certain evidence that leads the police to certain suspects in this case. So this is not one of those typical ones where you and I deal with, Vinny, where there's absolutely no clue. It's a complete mystery. Here, there was evidence that this young girl was being stalked. There was a jewelry left. She had some kind of weird secret admirer. She was nervous about that. People knew about it. So, I mean, there is certain leads in this case. So I think that, they just need maybe one missing piece or two missing pieces that puts them over the top to get that threshold that they need for the probable cause warrant and then for the arrest and hopefully conviction at this point. Now, we realize that the perpetrator, if still alive, would be, close to 80 or maybe in his 80s. So, you're working with that kind of situation. But I think that there seems to be enough to know or maybe know who did it and hopefully make an arrest.
Lisa, let me ask you, because the old-time footage fascinates me. The one part that I'm most fascinated with are the crime scene investigators with the trench coats, kind of like walking around the scene of the crime with the camera crew from the local news who was there. As a crime scene investigator, are you surprised that they were still able to test some DNA that was kept from back in 1964, way before we even conceived of DNA as evidence?
No, and I think DNA would be the best route to go in this day and age. Of course, no one knew anything about DNA back in that time, but now we can do so much with just what we call touch DNA, if someone simply touched an object. Of course, the other part of the equation with DNA is you need a person's standard to compare it to. Simply getting a DNA profile won't help unless you can also somehow legally get DNA profiles from any suspects you have in order to compare the two.
Yeah, and Bobby Chacon, there's all these Ancestry.com and these other websites, plus there's a lot of criminals have to submit to DNA. So I guess one way maybe you may not get the suspect himself, or someone might be related to him, and then you got to do some more digging to figure out who the connection may be to.
Yeah, and you can build a familiar DNA chart if you have enough material. You've got to remember they tested some of this stuff a couple of years ago, and DNA is a finite material, so it's used up normally in the testing process. So if you only have a certain amount and you use it up, then you don't have anything left to test. So hopefully off of that rope that she was tied with, there might be samples that they could get. And every couple of years we come up with a new way. That the MVAC system was one of the most recent ones, that now we have ways to get things now of DNA from objects that we previously couldn't. So even in the age of DNA, it's not like, we learned about DNA and then we learned all we had to learn. But now we're learning more and more all the time, and we're improving our methods to obtain DNA off of items that are old or different materials that we previously thought we couldn't get DNA off of. So the technology is ever increasing. And so as long as you still have, usable samples enough material to still examine, there's always that possibility existing.
All right. Big thanks, Bobby Chacon, Lisa Black. Always great to see you as well. Mike King, I think we lost his connection. And Dr. James Badal, always love speaking with him, but we had a little technical glitch tonight. But thank you all so much.
The murder weapon used on Beverly was never located. I think back on my own investigation into all the public records on this case, and I'm troubled by a couple of things. The more than a dozen disturbing phone calls that Beverly received before the murder. Then there was the mysterious gift box found on the back porch containing a bracelet and a ring. But most importantly, I'm disturbed by one suspect in particular who had a prior criminal history of assault on women. He used a knife in those assaults and was quoted by police as telling police, quote, "Whenever I get disturbed, I find a knife in my hand," close quote. That's chilling. Well, what are your thoughts on Beverly Jarosz's murder? Was this a stranger encounter where Beverly happened to just be in the wrong place at the wrong time, which incidentally was her home? Or is this killer much more personal? I'm going to be watching for your comments down below, and I want to thank you for weighing in on these cases. I really appreciate the conversations that you have with each other, and I want to express my thanks to the Court TV team and my colleague, Bobby Chacon. I'm honored to be able to associate with these folks and explore these fascinating criminal cases. Now, remember, you can find Profiling Evil on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And if you like podcasts, you can find us on your favorite podcast platform. And you can always get more information by visiting our website at profilingevil.com. Hey, thanks again, and we'll see you soon at the next crime scene.